Hi everyone, I'm Jo from Country Cow Designs, and in this video I'm going to take you through step by step the pattern to make this Wanderlust Tote. So you will need to own the pattern in order to completely follow along. I'm a little bit of a slow sewer, so you don't have to watch me all the way through. I've tried to speed up any areas that I can, and in the description of the video you'll see each step of the pattern. If you want to skip forward to a certain step, it will have the time that you need to skip forward to. So please leave your comments, give me some feedback, it really helps for my future videos, and also you can subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see future pattern releases and any other videos that I get around to making. Step one of the pattern is cutting and interfacing, but I didn't want you all to have to watch me cut and interface, so I've already done that. But I'll just explain a couple of the changes I've decided to make on this particular bag, because I know everybody likes to use different materials. The pattern calls for a heavyish material, like a canvas on the main exterior, but I wanted to use this fabric, this Alison glass fabric. So because this is just a quilting cotton, it's not really thick enough. What I decided to do was simply put 2 layers of the required interfacing on the back instead of just one. That gives it just that extra bit of weight that it needs. So I've done that to both of the exterior base panels. Now, this is the fabric I'm going for on the interior. Can you tell I like a lot of colour? So I've interfaced these as required. This is a tiny bit lighter than most quilting cottons, so although the pattern only calls to interface 1 of 2 on the pockets, I have decided to interface both of them on this occasion. But generally you don't need to interface both sides of the pocket, it's just a bit of overkill, and at the end of the day interfacing is quite expensive. So that's why I've done it that way. I've got my blue for my feature fabric. And I've decided to use cork for the base for a bit of extra durability. So I've got this lovely cork. I'm also going to be using a bit of that on my straps as well. So it's all cut out, it's all interfaced, ready to go. I'm going to do the slouchy version of the pattern, so there's not going to be any fleece involved, but at the end I will show you a comparison of 2 bags, one with the fleece, one without, so that you can decide which you'd like to use in your pattern when you build this bag. So here we go. Let's get on to step 2, the straps. Okay, so we'll start first off with the straps. This is the only part of the pattern that I'm doing slightly different from the written pattern, purely because I really wanted to have double layer straps on this. So it's going to have contrasting sides. On one side I'm going to have cork, and on the other side I've got this Alison glass art theory fabric. So because of this I have cut them half the width that the pattern states. So first thing we need to do is draw a line down the centre of each strap. This doesn't have to be perfect, it's especially with the 2 layer strap, it just isn't that important. Let's be honest. And I'm using a heat erasable pen, so it'll just fade away when I press this into place. Okay, so what I'm going to do in a minute is take that over to the iron and fold each edge into the centre line and press. So I'll show you that in a minute. But first we also need to sort out the cork. So it's a little bit harder because you can't just press it with an iron to keep it in place. So you've got 2 options. that I see done regularly. You can either use double-sided tape to really hold it in place, or you can just fold it in and clip it in place, leave it for a while, and it will sort of hold until you sew it. But having thought about it, I think I'd rather use the double-sided tape, so I'll just get some of that. So on this pattern, we leave the short edges raw, so you don't need to worry about folding those in. They're all going to be hidden. So if you are using something like cork, you just apply the double-sided tape down both edges, and then we're going to fold it into the centre again like we did with the fabric side, or like we're going to. So this centre fold is going to be completely hidden, so if it's not 100% central, it's not going to be a problem. It's just to hide the raw edges. If of course you're doing a standard strap, just follow the pattern for how you do that. So I'm just eyeballing this, as they say. The reason I didn't draw a central line on this is because it just won't show up on the back of the cork. And I'm always worried about marking it. If you press too hard, you can mark it through to the other side. This double-sided tape isn't the best. I'm just going to clip it at the ends. Okay, so you can now see that there is a central line it's been folded into. It's not exactly central, but that really doesn't matter because the fabric side of the strap is going to go on there. So I'll just head over to my iron and I will fold the fabric straps and then show you the next step. Okay, so my cork wasn't holding with double-sided tape alone, so I've ended up clipping it all the way along as well, just to keep it in place whilst I'm creating the straps. So I've pressed my fabric and you can see that it's the two edges are meeting. I've just folded them in and just pressed them so that they're meeting, but you want to make sure that they don't overlap at all because it would end up creating a bulge down the centre of your strap, so just make sure that they meet but they don't overlap. I've done that along the whole length and now it's ready to be attached to the cork, so I'll just do that. Okay, so I actually cut my fabric, so it's very, very slightly smaller than my cork. So what I've got is a strap where the cork is slightly wider. I just love having that little line down the edges. I just think it's a really nice feature, so that's why I've decided to do that. Now I've noticed that my strap's slightly longer on the cork end, so I'm just going to trim that down to match. And now I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and top stitch. Okay, so now I'm going to top stitch the whole length of the strap, and I'm going to do it 1/8 of an inch in on each side. On the fabric side, I've got my stitch length at 3.5, and I'm using a size 90 needle. I'm quite a slow sewer, so bear with me. Now I could have used double-sided tape to hold the fabric and cork together, but I prefer to just move as I go, especially because my double-sided tape isn't really working right now. So here we go. I'll be taking my time. So for everyone that's wondering about my machine, I'm using a Bernina, and it's the 930 record, I'm not really sure, but it was given to me by my grandmother, and it's from 1978, I think she said she bought it, so it's quite an old machine. It's really good. It's definitely not designed for bag making because it's got so many different stitch options, but it's brilliant. Okay, so there we go. You can see now how it's got the cork on the edges of the strap, and I just love the way that looks. So there you go, there we have it. Okay, so that's the straps done, and don't they look amazing? Yeah, I'm really happy with those. So I've done both of those. I wasn't going to make you watch me sew too. Next, we move on to the next part of the pattern, which is step 3, the exterior front. And the first thing we've got to do is mark up our strap facings. So I'm just going to use a heat erasable pen on this, although actually it doesn't matter because it's not going to show later anyway. So just grab the diagram from, what page is it? Page 6 of the pattern, and just make sure that you draw that onto all 4 of your strap facings. Make sure it's to scale and level. Okay. So if you struggle with your hands, if you just find it hard with fiddly things, I'd recommend when you cut these out at the beginning of the pattern, I should have said this earlier, just to cut them 1 inch bigger on both sides, because it doesn't really matter if it's bigger. It's not going to make any difference to the bag, and it will make it a lot easier for you later on when we're trying to pull these through. So just if you do that, make sure that you bear in mind that you need to make sure that this rectangle is still in the same place. So I'll just do all 4 of these. Actually, I'll leave the back too until we do the exterior back. Okay, so I'm actually following along on the pattern just to make sure that I'm doing everything in the right order, so that for anybody that's using the pattern at home, I'm not sort of jumping around, because I have a tendency to do that. Okay, so what we need next is the top part of our exterior front. So what I'm going for, I'll show you. I've got this Alison glass that I love for the bottom, and I've got teal on top. So that's going to be my exterior front. So first of all, we need the top part. Okay, and you'll see the diagram on page 6. It shows you where you need to put your strap facings. So we'll just pin them into place. I've got my dog a pin cushion. This is a gift from a friend. Okay, right. Okay, so you should have, that one's looking particularly wonky. I'm gonna have to sort that out. So you should have them in place. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to stitch the exterior rectangle. Now on yours, on the diagram on the pattern, you'll have a centre line with little triangles as well, but I just haven't been bothered to draw those on. But for now, we're just going to sew this external rectangle. So I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and do that now. Right, I'm going to put my stitch length down to a 2. I'm just going to start from one of the corners. Okay, so I pull my threads through to the back and then just trim them off. You don't actually have to do that. It's just a personal preference of mine. So now what you're going to do is cut the line and triangles that are in the centre. I know mine doesn't have them, but that's just because I've done this so many times. Okay, so I'm just going to cut that. Just be really careful that you don't cut your corner stitches when you're doing this. You want to get as close as you can, but just don't cut through your stitches. So you can see I've cut the triangles and the centre. Now what we're going to do is, this is where you'll be really glad that you used non-woven interfacing, because we've got to fold them. This just gives like a really crisp edge to your facing. So you just fold all 4 sides one at a time. And because you've got non-woven interfacing, it's crisper, so this bit's a little bit easier. So I'm just going to do that on both of them. You just press it with your fingers. I mean, you can press it with an iron if you want. It just, if you've got non-woven, it's just not going to be necessary to use an iron right now. Okay, and this technique is just like a zipper pocket when you've done those. So we just push it through to the back. This is the bit that people might struggle with if you struggle with fiddly things, and you'll be glad that you'd made the facings bigger. Okay, so you want to pull it through to the back, and you just need to spend a bit of time like rolling out the edges, making sure that it's like really clean cut. I'm not sure if you can see that. And that the edge is really neat. Okay, I'm going to do the other side. So just spend a bit of time on these. It just makes a big difference to how it looks if you really roll the edge and get it neat. Okay, so it's looking a bit wonky at the moment, don't worry, it'll work itself out. Okay, so that's the front, that's the back. And I'm going to take this over to the iron, and I'm going to give it a really good press from both sides, and that's what's going to get rid of these creases and give it a neater finish. Now, what I had meant to say previously was that I noticed a lot of people prefer to use rivets. Now, I designed this pattern with as little hardware as possible, which is why I've chosen to sew the straps in. But if you want to use rivets, that's absolutely fine. People like to put rivets through here instead of sewing around. If you're going to do that, then before you do anything with your strap, do an 1/8 of an inch rectangle around both of these holes, because that will hold your strap facing back and just seal that off. So do that first. Okay, I've given that a good press from both sides, and it's looking a lot better now, a lot less creased, nice, neat, clean edges. So what we need next is one of your strap backers and one of your straps. And what we're going to do is we're going to place them both right side up. Make sure you follow the measurements in 0.7 of this step. Make sure that it's the right distance from the bottom, because if you don't, it's going to make top stitching later on really difficult. So just clip that into place when you're ready, and then what we're going to do is we're going to sew a box and an X through it. Again, make sure that you don't make that too big, because this is going to be going behind the facing and you don't want your sewing to be showing. So it's going to be on the lower part of the strap. So we'll go and sew that now. Okay, so I'm just going to start right at the bottom. I've got it on a number 2 stitch length, and I'm just going to sew my box first. Then just for some added strength, I'm going to go back through with an X. So I'll trim my threads off, but you can see my box and X just for some added strength. It doesn't have to be neat, it's going to be completely hidden from view. So I'll just trim those threads. Alright, the next step, you're going to need your top part again. And what we're going to do is we're going to put the strap through one of the holes. Take your pick on which one. Okay, make sure you check step 9 that this is facing the right way up, because the distance between these parts is different and you need to make sure that you've got it facing upright, otherwise your handles are going to be coming out of the wrong end. Okay, what you want to do on the back is line up that backer so the top and bottom match, and we're going to just baste it into place. So we also need to make sure it's central. When you're sewing the top, just make sure you don't sew the strap. So just pull it away as you sew the top. Okay, I'm going to trim the threads, and then the next part that we're going to do is securing the strap into place. What I'm going to do is take this strap end that's open, and I'm going to feed it through the other end. Okay, so just make sure that your strap is facing outward if you've got a double, and that it's not twisted or anything. So what I'm going to do next is attach the other strap backer, which I've got here. Right. Just got to trim mine down. Okay. And I'm going to do the same as I did before with a box and an X. Okay, so same as before, right, just make sure that your strap's not twisted before you do this. We're going to baste it on the front, on the back, and just make sure the top and bottom line up. Again, make sure you fold the strap down before you do the top. So you should now have something like this. And what we're going to do next is we're going to sew around the boxes to seal those edges and sew the straps in again, just gives them even more support. To do the next part, I'm going to make sure that my handle are pointing up, and I'm going to start by folding the strap down and starting at the top, because for me that's the most difficult part. Now it depends, you're going to want either a zipper foot or to move your needle, if you've got a machine that can do that, move your needle to the far side so that you can do a 1/8 of an inch stitch around. If you want to be really precise, you could even draw it on with a heat erasable pen, just draw the rectangle around and then follow that. That would make it even easier. So we're just going to take our time because we need to be careful and make sure that we get a nice neat stitch. This is going to be on show. I've chosen to use a thread that matches the colour of my main fabric because I want it to look really neat, and I also want it to have that illusion of the handles being hidden, and I think that's more effective if I've got a matching thread. I've got it on a stitch length of 2.5 and I've got my needle to the far left. I'm also just going to make sure that my strap is central in the hole before I start. And I've got my humper jumper for when I'm going over the strap to make sure I don't skip any stitches. And there we have it. Nice neat box all the way around, making sure that this is still free at the top. It's only sewn in at the bottom. So now I'm going to do another box, another rectangle, 1/8 of an inch from this one, just to make sure it's really strong. I'm going to do the same on the other side of the handle as well. So you can see there that I've sewn all the way around with 2 boxes. What I'm going to do now is pull the thread through on the back rather than back stitching. So what you do is you just give them each a little tug and a little loop will appear. Grab a pin, pop it through the loop, give it a pull, and it'll pop through to the back like that. Then you just triple knot them and you're done, and you'll be left with a nice clean finish on the front. Next we're going to do the zip. Now the reason that there's a different size for the continuous zipper is because if you're using a ready-made zipper, it's going to have the metal stops on the end, and you need to remove those to make sure that you then just have the length of zip that we need that's in the pattern. So we are still on the external front, and if you look at point 16 it tells you what length your zip needs to be. I'm using continuous zip, so I've just trimmed it straight to that. First of all, what I'm going to do is put the head on. So I've got my head here. For me, the simplest way to do this is to undo the zip. Feed a little bit through each end. Put it down, put my fingers on each side, and pull the zip head on. So I know there's lots of different techniques for it, but for me, that's the simplest. What I also like to do before sewing it in is treat the end of my zipper tape with a lighter to make sure that it doesn't fray later on. You can just put a little bit of fray check on instead. So that's our zip ready. Now we're going to do the zip tabs. You should have 2 tabs. What you want to do first of all, fold it in half. Make a nice little crease. Then you're going to fold the short ends in on that crease on both sides. See what that? And then fold again, and you've got yourself a nice thick zipper tab. If you're really worried about losing your zip head, you can sew a couple of stitches through the end, but I don't think it's necessary because the zip tabs are going on now. Fold it over the end and clip that in place. We are going to stitch along here, and we're going to stitch through all the layers of the zip tab as well as the zip, and we're going to do it 1/8 of an inch in. So before we do that, I'm going to put the zip tab on the other end as well. Now, if you're using a really thick material, then the 4 layers is going to be tough later on when you're sewing down the side of the bag. So I'd recommend trying to do a 2-layer zip tab instead, and just folding over the very ends, because you don't want to have raw ends here, unless maybe you're using cork or leather. Then you don't want to have raw ends, but what you want to do is keep the rest of the tab to just 2 layers, so that when you're sewing the sides of the bag together, it'll be a little bit easier on your machine. So what I'll do now is I'll take this over and sew through both of these. If you're using a metal zip, be really careful here. Use your hand crank to make sure that you don't hit the actual teeth. You don't want to break the needle. I need to trim off my threads, but you can see there that we've zipped it into place. I hand crank it even though I've got a nylon zipper, just because sometimes I find that if the needle hits the zip then it displaces it and it makes it look messy, so I hand crank it through that as well. Now we've got that finished zip with its 2 zip ends. We'll finish constructing the front now. I'm going to use this bottom panel. I've cut this out with a bit of a gap at the bottom because this is going to be the bottom of the panel where the base is, and I wanted to make sure that this pattern was going to be completely central. So I'm going to place that right side up. This is the top part that I want facing the top of the bag. And what I'm going to do is quickly measure the centre. And I'm just going to make a mark with a fabric pen right in the centre of the top there. I'm going to do the same with my zip. And then what I'm going to do is place my zip at the top, zip right side down, fabric right side up, line up those centres. And clip it into place. Make sure that when you're clipping it that you're lining the zipper tape up to the top of the panel, not tabs, because the tabs are ever so slightly bigger. So clip it all along. Now that's clipped into place, I'm going to take it across to the sewing machine and I'm going to baste across the top with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, which, if you don't know that expression, it just means very, very slightly smaller than 1/4 inch. I've moved my zipper head out of the way because my zip head was on this side and this is where I'm starting. Just makes it easier to sew through. I know a lot of people like to use a zipper foot when doing zips, but I tend to just move the position of my needle instead. Now I've just left my needle in, left my presser foot up and move that zip head back so we're not sewing past it. I'm not back stitching because I'm just basting. There you go. My zip is now basted into place on my bottom panel. So I'm going to take one of my pocket panels. This is the interior of the pocket. Like I said, the pattern calls for only interfacing one, but I've interfaced both because it's such a light fabric. This would normally be the one that doesn't have interfacing on it. So what we're going to do, we've got our zip still right side down. I'm going to put this one right side down on top. Line it up with the top of the zip. If you like, you can mark the centre of the zip and the centre of the pocket piece again and make sure that it's central that way. Or you can just do it by sight and clip it into place. You'll notice that you'll have a little bit of zip tab poking out the end. That's what it should look like. Don't panic, that is correct. What we're now going to do is stitch along here, stitching through this pocket piece, the zip and the base panel. We're going to do that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, I'm going to move my zip head because it's up this end. I don't want it to distort my stitching. I'm on 2.5 stitch length. Now we need to press it. So take your pocket piece, take it up away from the zip, and you want to press it up away. Now put that behind, and we need to pull the base down. And again, we're going to press it away from the zip so we can get a nice neat top stitch. There you go. So when we top stitch through this, we're going to top stitch through the outer fabric, the zip, and we're also going to catch the top of the pocket as well on the inside. So maybe it's the wrong decision, but I've decided to use bright pink thread. So I'm going to try and get a really neat top stitch across the top. I'm going to use a nice long stitch length, I think 3.5, and just take my time with it, see how it goes. Okay, that's not looking too bad. And on the back you can see, I think you can see, that we've caught the pocket as well. So I'm going to go and assemble the rest of the pocket. I've got my second zip pocket piece. So with this right side down, so I'm looking at the other pocket piece, the first one that we did, I'm going to place this one on top and line it up with the zip and clip it into place. Same as before, make sure you're lining it up with the zipper tape, not the tabs, because they can be a bit misleading. There you go, so the pocket pieces are right side together. Make sure the sides line up here and that it lines up with the zipper tape at the top. And then we're going to sew through this with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're just basting here, so you don't need to worry about back stitching. Next we're going to need this piece. So, have your base, lay your top right side down so the right side's together, and you need to again line it up with the zipper tape. So I'm just going to click that into place. You might find it easier again to mark the centres of everything to make sure that it's all central. I just prefer to do it this way. There we go, and we're going to sew again through all of this. I'm going to be sewing through the zip, which is sandwiched between this layer and the pocket piece on the back, the top pocket piece. I'm going to do this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, if you've positioned your straps right, then you won't be sewing through them as you do this. You'll just miss them. In fact, your whole presser foot should miss them. Ta-da! You can start to see how it's going to come together. Right, we're going to take this over to the iron and give it all a good press before we top stitch. Now, before you top stitch the top section, make sure that you pull the top pocket piece up so that when you're top stitching, you top stitch through that pocket piece like this. It just means that then the pocket piece just stays nicely out of the way. It's not absolutely essential, but I like it because I think it keeps it out of the way of the zip. So when you open the pocket, it's tucked away nice and neat. Again, I put my stitch length on a 3.5. 8.5, that'll be pretty long. And I'm going with the pink thread, which I'm a little bit worried about. I'm going to get my humper jumper out when I get to the straps again. I just don't want to have any skipped stitches or anything. Now, you remember that I specifically mentioned about putting the pocket piece up before you top stitched the front panel, and you will notice that if you did that. It looks slightly different to mine because I forgot to do that. So it doesn't make a huge difference. It just means I feel that the pocket piece is a little bit too close to the zip when you open up the zip, but you can see it's actually fine. It works perfectly fine. It's just a personal preference of mine, but if you followed the pattern instructions and my video instructions, then yours will look a little bit different to mine going forward because I forgot to do that. Now that you've top stitched everything, make sure that your pocket pieces are together, and what you'll notice is that one of them is longer than the other one, so we just need to trim them to match. Matches. So I'm going to press them up by 1/4 of an inch. What you're just going to do is just fold it up by 1/4 of an inch. Do the same on the other side. And what that means is that when we turn the bag later through the pocket, it'll be really easy to sew the pocket up from the inside because it'll already be turned into a neat edge that matches on both sides. So I'll just head over to my iron and press those. There we go. You can tell I've got a bit of a leaky iron, but still it does the job. And you can tell that both my pocket pieces are folded up to match by about 1/4 of an inch. I'm just going to clip those together. So we're going to be turning through this pocket later on, so we don't want to stitch the centre. We just want to do down the sides and 2 inches in on each end. And at the top, you'll notice where the pockets meet, you're not going to be able to stitch all the way up. So just stitch as far as you can, and the rest will be caught when we sew the bag together later. So there won't be holes. I'm going to use about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure you back stitch well where the pocket's going to be turned or it will split. So you see at the top I have a little bit of a gap there, but that's okay because that's going to get caught as we sew across it later on. Okay, I've got my opening for later on for birthing the bag, and that is all done for the front panel. Looks kind of good, doesn't it? Not sure about the pink top stitching, but otherwise I love it. I'm now starting on step 4 of the pattern. We're going to do the exterior back. A lot of it is very similar to the exterior front, so I figured you wouldn't want to watch me redo it all. So to start with, I again marked out my strap facings and I've attached them, I've just pinned them in place onto the top piece. Now I'm going to sew those rectangles again. Now I'm just going to trim off my threads. So you can see there that I've sewn those on. What I'm now going to do, yours will have a line and 2 little triangles on the inside of the box. I'm going to cut that out. I've done this so many times I don't draw that anymore. Now, like last time, make sure you don't cut through your stitches on the corners. You want to get as close as you can for a really neat finish, but do not cut your stitches. See there, I've cut that through, and now I'm going to pull it through to the back again, and I'm going to press from both sides. So I've now pressed that from both sides, and I've spent a bit of time rolling out those seams again, just to make sure it's nice and neat. What we're now going to do is place the strap again onto the strap backer. We need to make sure that we're away from the bottom by the amount that's specified in the pattern, and I'm just going to sew that again with a box and an X. So I'll just go to the sewing machine and do that now. Same as last time. Make sure you've got your panel the right way up. Check the image of the pattern. It will tell you the measurement that you need to have, because if you look, that is a different length to this. So with the right way up, put your strap through one of the holes. We're going to clip it in place. Make sure that your strap is central in the hole, because it's a little bit smaller than the hole itself. See what I mean? So I'm just going to clip that into place. Now we're going to baste the bottom and the top, but when we go through the top, we need to make sure we're not sewing through the strap. Take the other end of your strap, put it through the other hole. Make sure your strap isn't twisted. Put it on the end of the other backer, and again sew it with a box and an X. Trim your threads. There we go. Just again, make sure that your strap's not become twisted or anything, that it's all even, and line up your backer again and clip it into place. making sure that my strap's nice and central. Yeah. There we go. So now I need to sew my boxes around both of the strap ends, and I'm just going to take my time doing that again. So feel free to skip ahead. There you go. All done. On to the next step. Now we're going to attach together the rest of the panel. I should have mentioned earlier that the front and back bottom panels are slightly different sizes, so just be really careful when you're doing it that you get them the right way round, because there is a reason for that. So I've marked the centre on the top of the bottom, and I've marked the centre on the bottom of this one, and now I'm going to match them together and clip them. Right sides together, and we're going to sew across the top with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to press the seams open on the back, and then I'm going to press it on this side as well before we top stitch along both lines. I've pressed that now, looking a bit better. I've opened the seams on the back. So now I'm going to top stitch both underneath and above the seam. You can see my leaky eye in there again. I'm going to use my pink thread again to match the front, even though I think maybe it was an error in judgment. So we'll see. Hopefully it won't look too bad. I've got my stitch length to match what I had on the front, which is 3.5 big stitches to top stitch. I much prefer that. There you go, top stitch above and below the seam. And that's the back panel finished. Step 5 of the pattern is exterior assembly, so we're going to get started on that. First of all, I've got my base piece, and then I've got my base foam. So I need to place that centrally, like that, on the wrong side of the base. Now it's up to you how you want to keep this in place. I think I'm going to use some double-sided tape just to help it a little bit. I'm going to put it along these edges. That way I won't be sewing through it, because it can sometimes be a problem for your needle when you sew through double-sided tape. Right, gonna do my best to get this central. It doesn't it's not going to make a huge difference if it's the wrong way this way, but you need to make sure you have an even gap on these two short sides, because that's where it matters. Now fold your long edges in. Hopefully your double-sided tape's more effective than mine. I'm going to add some clips. That's what your base should be looking like. So I'm going to set that aside. And now we're going to go on to the next point in the pattern. So before we go any further, it's really important that you check that your panels are the same size, because they should be if you've used the correct seam allowance. But sometimes if you've not been paying attention, it happens to me all the time, then they come out slightly different. So what you want to do is lay them side by side, and what should happen is that they should match up. The seam join on this one should match the seam join just here on the front panel, because what you want to do is when we attach them together, you want to make sure that the seams match up, otherwise it's just going to look rubbish. Okay, so once you're sure that they're the same size, put them right sides together, and then what we're going to do is clip them together. Make sure that those bits just there line up, those seams. Just make sure that's on each side. Clip it together, and then we're going to sew the bottom first. So I've got them matched up, and I'm now going to sew along the bottom with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you need to take all your clips off. What we're going to do is we're going to press open the seams from both sides, and then we're going to top stitch along both of these sides of the seams to just keep the back seams in place. That's all pressed now, so I'm going to top stitch both sides of the seam just to make sure that we capture the seams behind and it all lays flat. how we're going to do the rest of the exterior assembly. So we need to first of all mark the centre on the short ends of the base. This will be hidden from view, so it doesn't matter if it's not an erasable pen. Right, take your exterior, line up the marks with the centre fold where the two pieces join together and clip it into place. This is where I like my giant wonder clips, they're really handy. Now what we need to do is top stitch this into place. What we're going to do is top stitch all 4 sides with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and it's going to stitch through the base and through the body. There you go. You probably noticed as I was doing it, I kept having to make sure that the cork wasn't slipping out. That's just because my double-sided tape was not strong enough. So you should hopefully not have a problem with that if you're using good tape or if you've got some glue. But you can see I've just top stitched. I've done it around all 4 edges. I've given this really lovely finish on the base. What I'm going to do next is point 10 of this step. So I'm going to take the front of my exterior and place it right side down. And in image H there's some measurements, and I'm just going to mark out all of the lines that we need, because that's how we're going to get this fat bottom on the bag. I don't know how else to describe it. So I'm just going to mark those lines all out as specified in the pattern. Now I've done that, I'm going to clip these panels right side together. Make sure that you're folding the base perfectly in half. So you can probably see there that my base is going to be folded perfectly in half, and then I'm just going to clip it all the way up the sides, and once I've done that I'm going to sew those lines together. I'm also going to make sure that the seams up here that I said needed to be meeting up earlier, that they are meeting up still. So I need to make sure that they line up perfectly, because otherwise it's just not going to look very nice. now I'm ready to sew. Right, I've changed my needle over to a size 100, basically because the cork's quite thick on the base and I just think probably the best decision. So I'm sewing on the lines that I've drawn and I'm going to start from the bottom. I just feel like it's, I don't know, more accurate to start from the bottom. Then if I've got any cutting errors or anything, they're going to show up at the top, which can be, you know, sorted out with the top stitching, better than having a wonky base. This is where you're going to catch the side of your pockets, so that bit that we didn't sew earlier. You're just going to catch them and seal up the edges as you go through. Now, whenever I'm sewing the exterior of a bag, I always sew a second line of stitching almost on top of the first line. It's probably about 1/16 of an inch just to the edge of it, because otherwise sometimes when there's a lot of stress on the bag, you can get, you know, where your seams show and they show through the edge. So I always make sure I double stitch it. You can just about see with my stitching that there's just two lines. They're almost on top of each other. I'm going to stitch the other side. There you go. If you do a second row of stitching, make sure that it is really, really close, because if it comes out any further into the seam allowance, it's going to cause it's going to make it more difficult when you do your box corners in a minute. So let's do those. Right, first things first, once I've trimmed the threads, you need to trim the bottom just here because we need to press the side seams open, and like you can see that it's preventing us from doing that. Just make sure you don't cut into your stitching. See, now we can press our side seams open nice and easy. I've moved over here so I can trim my seam allowances. Now, just here I'm going to be going through the zip, so I don't want to use my fabric scissors. With the seam allowances trimmed, where the curves are now, near just like below the zip, we're going to just snip because that will allow the seams to press out better. It'll just give a neater finish at the end. You just want to do snips slightly smaller than the seam allowance because you don't want to cut stitches. Now I'm going to go press open all my seams because that's going to make it a lot easier when we do the box corners. We're on page 15 of the pattern. I've pressed out the seams best I can. The cork base obviously doesn't want to press very well. I know some people do use an iron to press cork, and they say that it works with a pressing cloth, but I have just always ended up having my cork look wrinkly and horrible afterwards, and I don't want to risk it. Now we're going to do the box corners. So, first of all, just check that your seams are alright on the inside. You haven't got any issues. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Now, pull the sides of your bag out and match up those seams. So that's your two side seams, and just clip them in place. Now we want to work on the corners, so push one of your corners down. Should be looking like this. And we need to make sure that this side seam that we're working on is lining up with the base seam underneath. A lot of people use a pin now. They stick a pin through and just check that it comes out the right side. I'm just going to feel around. Now what you can do is you can feel the base here on the sides. You can feel it running along here and running along this side because your base has got foam in it. And what we want to do to check that it's central is make sure that there's an equal distance from the seam to this side and the seam to that side. That way we'll get a perfect square. Just checking my measurements on this. Okay. There's nothing wrong with taking your time on this because good box corners are essential. There we have it. Now once you've got it central, use the measurement. It's in image O on this page of the pattern. And draw a straight line. Use some clips to hold it in place further down. That should stop it moving around. Now if you want to, you can pop a pin through and check that it comes out the other side. Not sure if you can see that. Coming out right between the seams. Then you know you've got a perfect box corner. We need to take this over to the machine and sew across the line that we've drawn. Now I'm just going to trim this down to about 1/2 inch. There we have one done. So we'll move on to the other corner. Right, now I've got that done. I've got 2 box corners. I'm going to turn this right side out. See what we've got. Okay, I think it looks quite nice. Just check that my seams match up there, the top panels are lined up. Yep, same on both sides, so that's great. The box corners look nice and tidy. Yeah, that's really good. Now we'll move on to the lining. I've got my 2 pocket pieces. I'm just going to put them on the right side together. And then clip them all the way around. The sides of this pocket are going to get sewn up later, so we're just going to sew the 2 long edges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Change my needle back to size 80, I think it is. got my stitch length on a 2.5. If you've only interfaced one of your pocket pieces, sometimes you can find with fabric that's not interfaced that it stretches a bit. So I find that if you make sure that the interfaced side is on top, then the bottom piece doesn't stretch, and yeah, I just seem to get a better result. I'll turn this right side out. No, I'm not. I'm going to press my seams open, then I'm going to turn it right side out. I'd be the first to admit that I hate ironing, but pressing the seams open just makes such a difference. Looking to the top of the pocket. So give your seams a little roll, make sure you got a really nice neat top. And then press that as well. Now I need to top stitch it. I'm going to change my thread to a matching colour. When I'm top stitching, I much prefer a matching colour. Maybe it's because my top stitching just isn't quite good enough. Decide which way up you want your pocket. You need to decide where the top's going to be. I think I'm going to go this way because I love the bats on this. I don't know if they're supposed to be bats, but I'm going to top stitch up here. I'm going to use a longer stitch length because I'm top stitching. I'm going to go to a 3.5. Grab one of your main lining panels. If you've got a directional print like me, just make sure that it's facing the same way as your pocket. Just trim those threads. And and use page 17 of the pattern for the placement of your pocket. It tells you where it needs to go. Don't panic about the fact that your pocket is slightly narrower than the main lining. It is supposed to be that way. Now we just want to baste it into place on the sides and sew it at the bottom. I'm adjusting my stitch length because I want to use a short stitch length when I'm actually sewing the bottom, but when I'm basting the sides I have it on a long stitch length. I want a 2 now, purely because I want the bottom of the pocket to be nice and strong. Now the good sewists out there are probably going to spot the fact that my fabric doesn't match up where my pocket is. It's just, I've never been bothered about matching up my fabrics. This one is for me, so if it was for someone else, yep. Maybe if it's stripes, I will make sure that they line up. But when it's a fabric like this, I quite like it like this. So I'm next going to split this pocket because we don't want one huge pocket. 0.7 on page 17 of the pattern gives you the measurements. Get a heat erasable fabric pen and just draw the lines up for where we're going to split the pocket. Make sure they're straight. This is where a quilting ruler like this is so helpful, because you can line up along the top of the pocket and along the side and therefore check that it's completely level and straight. Now if you're making this bag for you, you can of course customise the pockets, move them if you've got a specific item that you want to be able to fit in there, maybe even put a pen holder in with a nice thin pocket. This size I found quite nice. It means you can fit a mobile phone easily in the middle, and I can fit my keys and something else in the side pockets, which are very slightly smaller. Now I'm going to go stitch up these lines. For these pockets, I'm going to begin at the bottom of my line. I'm not sure if you can see that. I'm going to go a needle's width to the right, all the way up to the top, one stitch across and back down the other side of the line. And I'm going to do that for both. Here you go, you can see my fabric pen, and I've stitched on either side of that line. I've done that for both pockets. Now we've got 3 pockets. I'm going to take that over to the iron and just remove the erasable fabric pen. Place this panel right side up. Make sure that your pocket openings, facing the right way. So from the top, we need to measure and mark where the magnetic snap is going to go. So what we'll do first of all is use on page 17 the measurements in point 10. So I'll just do that and I'll make my mark. Then grab the back of one of your magnetic snaps, if you can. Okay, one of those, one of the washes. Make sure that the central hole is over the mark that you made. And then we're just going to colour in the 2 lines on either side. So you're colouring in these lines on either side. Find yourself a small pair of scissors and just snip those lines. I like to use a bit of fray check on those slits just to make sure they don't cause any trouble in the future. Then grab one of your magnetic snaps. I'm going for the male part, and just push the prongs through. Like that. Okay. You also need a small piece of, this can be foam, Peltex, whatever you've got going around. Just cut off a little square. Place the washer on there and do the same thing, mark it. And the snip. And then just place that on the back and fold these arms out. There you go. Okay. Let me just check the pattern to see what we're going to do next. Right, we're going to do the other panel. I just have to make sure that I'm actually going in line with the pattern for anybody else that's following it. Otherwise I just jump around. Right, make sure that your panels are the same way up if you've got a directional fabric. These 2 I cut out together, so you might be able to see that the pattern matches up, so that's definitely the right way up. Measure and mark again. Use your washer to mark the sides. get the other half of your snap. If you store all your snaps together, make sure that you've got opposing parts and you're not trying to put two males on or two female parts. Okay, we're going to do the same with this other offcut. Now this panel that doesn't have the pockets on, we're going to turn it right side down. Make sure you've still got it as the top facing upwards. And use the pattern, page 18. There's image I, it's got a diagram of how we're going to mark out the seams. This is how we get the bell bottom on this bag. I'm sure you're all wondering why I didn't just design these panels to be this shape at the beginning, but there's two reasons why I didn't do that. Firstly, I wanted this pattern to be available to everybody, whether they've got a printer or not, and if you do specialised shapes, then anybody that doesn't have access to a printer can't print the pattern and therefore can't use it. So instead I decided that I would start off with rectangles that we just trim to shape when we need to. The second reason is because I think personally that this gives a much neater finish, whereas errors quite often occur when you're cutting and you can have minimal, like slight differences in where you cut on one side of a line and another side on the other piece. So you can end up with like little inaccuracies. By doing it this way and drawing it out and then sewing through both panels at once, you're getting this really neat, crisp finish and showing that the panels are perfectly matched, and I prefer that. That's that done. So we now need to place these two panels together. Clip your snap together because then you know you've got placement right. Get everything lined up and clip it into place. Right, let's sew the bottom. So I'll start by sewing together the bottom with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure that you use the correct seam allowance because when you create nice neat box corners you need to have it matching on the opposing sides. Next, what we normally do is press these open before sewing the sides, but I'm going to sew up the sides and then I'm going to press everything. There you go. I'm now going to trim down my seam allowances to about 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to press open all my side seams and bottom seams. Where the lining curves, you can probably see it, yeah, just there. Where it curves, we're going to snip again. This just helps it to lay better rather than like stretching it out on the lining. So just do some little snips, make sure they're smaller than your seam allowance so you're not cutting into your stitches. I think some smaller scissors might be a bit safer. So you can see there, just made a few snips. It will just help it sit better when it's inside the bag. Now I'm going to go and press all my seams open. So I've pressed my seams open. I know I go on about pressing seams. It's not because I enjoy ironing. It's just that if you want a really, really neat lining, it does go a long way to helping. So I've done that. It also helps when we're doing our box corners, which we're going to do now. So we're going to open it up again. Match up those side seams and pull out the corner. Again, take your time with this. If you find it easier, stick your hand inside and kind of push the corner out a bit. And then you can feel where the bottom seam is. So we want this side seam to match this bottom seam. These two need to line up. On page 19 of the pattern, there's an image N, which has the measurements that you need for these box corners. This time we can't feel the base, so you just need to make sure that your seam is running up the middle and that it's completely central. Mark a nice solid line when you've got it. Make sure you've got your clips. And again, if you like, you can check it with a pin. Perfect. Now I'm going to do the other one, and then I'll go and sew both of them at once. You'll notice I decided to do 2 lines of stitching there, just to make sure again that my stitches don't show. So the second line is almost entirely on top of the first line, it's just slightly to the edge. Trim your threads, and we need to trim the seam allowances down as well. We're about to put this into the exterior, so this is your last chance to neaten it up. If you've got any fleece in the seams because you're fleecing yours, make sure that you just try and trim out as much as you can. It will make sure that the line is really neat. When you're trimming your box corners, just trim them down to about ½ inch. Don't go any smaller at the moment, because there's still another step involved for those. Give it a little check over. Right, next thing we need to do is the final assembly step, so we'll move on to that now. Now we're going to really see the bag come together. So you're going to need your exterior and your lining. First of all, remember to open the zip on your exterior. This is the step I constantly forget, and you'll regret it later. It's much easier if you don't know. So, fold your straps down, and you need to put the exterior into the lining. Now we need to make sure it's the right way around, so we want the zip pocket on the opposite side to the interior pockets. Tuck your straps in. Now line up one of your side seams and clip it. Do the same on the other side. Throwing them everywhere today. There we go. And before we actually get to the point of top stitching, I like to just check that my lining and exterior fit together really neatly, because if they don't, now's the time to find out. So I clip the side seams, and then I just keep them together all the way along, all the way around. Just make sure that you're checking. And then when you get to the end, make sure that you've got no excess lining or excess exterior. This one just happens to be perfect, which is great. Doesn't always happen that way. Do it on the other side as well. Perfect. So these two are going to go together really nicely. Now, if your lining's a little bit too big, just run an extra seam down the sides, but do it on both sides equal, because if you just do one side, it's going to throw everything off. Similarly, if your exterior is too big, run some extra seams down the inside. Just just try and trim it down a little bit so that they fit, particularly at the top, because your top stitching is going to look really bad if you've got like lumps of extra material. You know, it's gonna I've forgotten the word. It's not going to look good. Right, so now that we know that it fits, we just need to clip it all the way around. For this step, you really can't have too many clips. That's all clipped together. Now it's just to stitch around. I know a lot of other people sew it the other way, almost inside out, but I love having a cylinder machine because I prefer to sew my bags together this way. Now you notice my magnetic snap's just here, so if you've put everything where it needs to be and followed all the measurements in the pattern, you won't be anywhere near your magnetic snap right now, and you'll have plenty of space to get around. See there, you can see that there's loads of space between that stitching and my magnetic snap. Now on the inside, you'll have been capturing these strap backers that we basted in earlier. So make sure that you catch them nice and neat. As long as you basted them in with a small seam allowance, then that will happen naturally as you do it. This is the part of the pattern that people really dislike. So, right, you finished sewing the top together. Now what you want to do is pull your exterior out. Make sure that your corners are out. Right, this is our lining, this is our exterior. This is our zip pocket. We need to make sure that this is accessible because we're going to turn the bag through it. What we're going to do is fold them over together and we're going to sandwich them together. So this isn't an essential step. You can just go ahead and pull your bag through now if you like. What this does is it ties the lining into the bag, so it makes it really neat, and it means that your lining isn't, you know, coming out when you pull stuff out your bag. And there's quite a few methods for doing this, but this is, I think, the simplest way, so that's why I've decided to use this method. I'm going to show you a couple of other options as well. I've seen people who sew the side linings together a little bit so that the seams are sewn together and that holds the lining in place. So that's one option. For the options covered in the pattern, what we're going to do, I'm going to grab these box corners and we're going to fold them over so the bases are touching. So this seam is touching this seam. And then It's a little bit awkward. I'm going to clip the box corners together. Now the essential thing is that these seams match, that they are right on top of each other, the base seams. So I'm going to do that first. It's going to call for a jumbo clip. So this is what we've got. This is the external box corner and this is the lining box corner. They're sandwiched together. Those centre seams should be all matched up. You also want these seams to match up where you sew through the box corners. So once everything's central, what we do is we sew through both seam allowances as close as we can to the existing seam. Make sure that you do not go any further over here. So you just want to sew through here, maybe 1/8 of an inch from this existing seam. And that's why it's important that you make sure that these ones match, because you don't want to be sewing through the seam allowance of the lining, but the actual bag of the exterior. So that's the way that the pattern does. If you've used any thick materials or you've got just a really basic machine, you're going to struggle to get through this. So you've got a couple of options. First of all, use a large needle. I normally would use a 110. Make sure that you take your time, hand crank it all the way if you need to. The other option, if you really can't manage it, is what I'm going to show you now, which is just an alternative. Grab yourself a needle. Okay, I've threaded up my needle with a double thread for extra strength. So this is the option if your machine can't handle it. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you hand stitch the whole thing. You can literally just run just a few stitches through, just on the corners. This isn't going to be easy, but should give it a nice neat finish. That'll do for that side. Now I'll just do the other side and then we'll turn through and see what effect that has. Both my corners are now sewn together, so I've just done the edges. If you are able to, it does get a better finish if you can sew through the whole lot, but it's just a matter of what your machine can handle, whether you've got the right needles and whether you want to or not. Some people don't even like their lining sewn in, so you can skip this step altogether. If you are doing it and you've got any foam or fleece in the seam allowance, just trim that out. That'll make it much easier for your machine whilst you're doing this step. So now that it's done, I'm going to turn it out and show you the result. Because I left my pocket on the outside, it's really easy to turn. If you accidentally sewed it the wrong way around and your pocket is on the inside, you can turn it all through. It's just a little bit harder. So reach in through your pocket and start pulling it out. If you've got a chopstick handy, that's a big help here. Right, push your corners out. This is where you'd use a chopstick. That base looks nice, doesn't it? Right. I'm going to try to show you the lining so you can see the effect. Now, it needs a good press, but I don't know if you can see inside there. The box corners, because we've sewn them in, are staying put, which just gives it a really nice, neat finish. If we'd sewn all the way across, it might be even neater, but this is a great alternative and I think it looks lovely. Holds the lining in place nicely. Next, we're going to pull out the zip pocket. Make sure you get all the corners out. And we're going to sew this up. So this is where it's really handy that we pressed it earlier because it's got a nice neat fold already. Fit that in place. Make sure you've got a thread that matches your pocket. We're going to sew it with 1/8 of an inch or less, if possible, seam allowance, because whatever we sew here is going to be on show. Now, if you're really good at hand stitching, you might know how to do hidden stitches. I am too impatient to do that, so I'm just going to sew it with the machine. But if you know how to do it, hidden stitches are even better. For me, I think this part is going to be so hidden inside the pocket that it's just not a problem for me. There you go. So that is going to be on show. It's going to be a little bit ugly inside the pocket, but at least it's inside the pocket, not inside the lining of the bag, so nobody's really going to notice it. The next step is to press everything, the whole bag, but particularly around the top. We need to make sure that the lining sits just 1/8 of an inch inside, and that's the same height all the way around the bag. So I'm going to go spend a bit of time pressing that. There we go, spent some time pressing that and making sure that the lining sits just below the exterior. It's looking amazing. So you're already getting an idea of how the slouchy bag stands up. It is slouchy. I'll compare it to the fleece one for you later. Now we need to do the dreaded top stitch. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use clips. I'm going to put some clips around just to make sure that it all stays in place whilst I'm top stitching. I'm also going to spend a bit of time just hammering my seams. If you just put a bit of scrap fabric on top, just give it a good hammer, really push those seams in, because as you come over these, it can sometimes skip a stitch on your top stitching, and you want it to be really, really neat. So I'm going to do that. So I'll just get to clipping. Here comes the top stitching. Now, before you go any further, check your bobbin. You don't want to run out. I think they call it bobbin roulette, don't they? Yeah, I've got loads. Plenty. Now, top stitching is definitely not my best skill. I have therefore chosen to have 2 different coloured threads. For the top, I've got a thread that matches my exterior, and in my bobbin I've got a thread that matches the interior. Sometimes this doesn't work because you can see little bits of the thread coming through, but I'm hoping that on this occasion it's going to work perfectly. We'll see. On the pattern, I've instructed for 2 layers of top stitching. I love the look of 2 layers, but I understand if you only want to do 1 because you hate top stitching like me. But I'm going to put it on a nice long stitch length. I think I'm going to go with 4. Grab your hump jumper when you get to the side seams. I'm going to pull my threads through to the interior and tie them off. So you just give them a little tug and use a pin, it makes it a little bit easier. can see the blue thread coming through there, and you just pull it through. Do the same for the other. That one's going to give me a bit more of a fight. So, I think that looks pretty good actually, and I think I'm going to leave it with just one row of top stitching this time. It's coming through pink on the inside, blue on the outside, so it's nice and hidden. So there you go. I'm going to give it one good press, and then I will compare it to the fleecy option, and also I'm going to discuss the leather add-on that's available for free for this pattern. So there we have it. This is a finished Wanderlust Tote. I love that lining. It's got its 3 pockets, one large in the central and 2 slightly smaller. It's got a nice tight lining, nice fitted, and it's got that large spacious zipper pocket on the front. So the handles are designed to fit over your shoulder. So this is the slouchy version that we've made. This is my favourite. There's also the option in the pattern to add fleece, so I wanted to compare the two. This is one that has fleece. So the slouchy, it struggles to stand up on its own. The fleece doesn't. So you can see the difference. You might also be able to see that it's just a bit thicker. Now this one, on the lining, I sewed the entire box corners in, just as it's written in the pattern. So you can see the difference. It's just a little bit tighter, a little bit neater. So that's the difference there. Compare that with this one, where the lining hasn't been sewn in at all, and can pop right out, which some people prefer, but it's hard to get such a neat finish. It's just feeling a bit baggy, it's not sitting as nicely on the inside. So now this one, you might be able to tell, is made from leather, quite thick leather, and I originally did leather work before I got into fabric, which is why I still like to use leather every now and then. Most of this has been hand stitched, as you can probably tell by the base. So what I've done, for anybody else who just wants to give leather a try, maybe you've not used it before, I've provided a free add-on for the Wanderlust pattern, which will show you, first of all, it gives you tips on how to use leather that you can use on a sewing machine, thin leather, but also it will show you how to handle thick leather that your machine can't sew, and how to hand stitch it. It's just a brief overview, but it shows you which steps of the Wanderlust pattern need adjusting in order to create one with leather. So this one doesn't have any fleece, but the leather is quite thick, so in my opinion it doesn't need it. So that's the Wanderlust Tote. I hope you enjoy making it. I hope you've enjoyed watching the video. Please do leave comments. I love to hear your feedback.